Kamar Jalil is suing his former roommates, Katie Calderon and Amante Nepomuceno, for rent and the cost of 2 cats.
Court come to order. All rise.
Have a seat, everyone.
Case 2170, Jalil versus Calderon Nepomuceno.
Thank you. You're welcome. Oh, my goodness. Calderon.
Hello.
What's your first name?
Amante.
Amante.
Yeah.
Good. It's much easier than your last name for me to pronounce. Mr. Jalil, this roughly is what the case is about. You and Miss Calderon were in a relationship for a period of time. You decided to take an apartment. You were both on the lease. So far, correct?
Correct.
Your arrangement with Miss Calderon, which seems to be consistent in both your complaint and your answer, is that you had a much better paying job. She was going to provide the food and some other stuff for the house, and you were going to be covering the rent when you lived together, which you did.
Correct.
There came a time when Amante, who was a friend of yours, came to live with you. According to you, he was going to help out with the rent.
Correct.
He came, he lived with you, he helped out with the rent for maybe a period of time, and then he helped himself to your girlfriend.
Correct.
Now they're a couple. When you were no longer a couple with Miss Calderon, she stayed in the apartment for a period of time, but then they both left.
Correct.
And you're suing both of them for rent and for the return of 2 cats that they took when they left. You claim the cats are yours.
That's correct.
That's what the case is about. And some cat expenses in the event that I let them keep the cat. Cats. 2 cats. So when did you and Miss Calderon sign a lease together?
We signed the lease together at the end of July with the landlord present.
July of 2022?
July of 2021. Correct.
And it was for a year?
Correct.
And you had a job working for whom, sir?
I worked for a company called Steris.
What do they do?
They provide medical equipment to hospitals all over the world.
How long have you been working for them?
I'm going to have 8 years under my belt this year.
And when you moved into the apartment in July of 2021, what kind of work was Miss Calderon doing?
At the time, she was working at I want to say an animal hotel.
It was a pet daycare boarding facility.
Okay. Were you an hourly employee?
I was an hourly employee.
And I am correct that when you moved in July, your arrangement was that you were going to pay the rent.
That was...
The arrangement.
Correct.
When did Amante come to live with you?
About August to...
That's
Right.
correct.
Shh.
He...
Just...
Amante was going to be our 3rd roommate.
You mean 1, 2, 3?
Correct.
Well, you're not roommates, really. You and the defendant, Miss Calderon, were not roommates. You shared a room.
We shared a room
And Amante was going to live where?
in another room.
And what was your arrangement with Amante with regard to paying rent?
We would split the rent 3 ways.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And how much was your share of the rent?
I would say approximately 927.
How long did you live there?
I was there when they signed the lease. I watched it all happen when they signed the lease. I came in, they signed
Okay.
everything.
Well, you didn't sign the lease,
I did not.
but you were there from the beginning?
Yes.
And it was your agreement with the plaintiff that you would pay a third of the rent?
Yes.
Great.
We asked the landlord
Okay,
to.
so, hey, try not to hold each other's hands. Let's do the coochie someplace else. So you agreed with the plaintiff that despite the fact that you were not on the lease, you were going to assume the responsibility of a third of the rent, $927.
Yes.
So you moved in July, August, September, October, November, December, January, February, March. You left in April?
Yeah.
So you were there for 9 months.
Yes.
Did you pay rent for the 9 months?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that correct?
He paid rent for about the 7.5 months.
Okay. And then you left.
Yes.
Why did you leave?
I decided to leave because he decided to go to another place he was offered. So
What do you
I
mean he
could-
decided to go to another place
He
that was...
got a place from his grandparents in another city. So I couldn't hold down the rent with her. So I decided to leave to save money and go back to my parents' house.
Now, Mr. Jalil, you see, you don't make up a story like that, like he just told me. A lot of that has the ring of truth to it. Where are you living now?
my grandparents' house in an in-law unit
So when did you tell them that you were going to a different place?
in March.
When did you leave?
I left in July.
Did you let him know that you were staying until the end of the lease?
I
What?
I
What?
I discussed with them that I would be leaving, but I would stick around to help them find either a different location or even suggesting that we all went back to our respected families just to, call it.
Mr. Jalil, this isn't working for you. I have to tell you something, sir. This case is not working for you at all. And it's only because Mr. Amante is very direct with me that you're suing them for $10,000. Where does that come from in your mind? Your agreement with her was you were going to pay the rent. You're never out of pocket. Your agreement was you were going to pay the rent. He paid his rent when he was there. He paid his 1/3. You then told them you were leaving. That's a whole different story than what you wrote in your complaint, Mr. Giulio. Do you understand?
Correct.
It's a whole different story. So, at best, Armante would owe you for 3 months' rent if they just left. But you told them that you were leaving. Now, when did you find out that they were a couple?
I found out at the end of April.
Were you all living together?
Yes.
So you just had 2 months left to the lease. So he was paying you. He paid you in March. You had May, June. You signed the lease in July. So it was over at the end of June, June 30th.
It would have been over at the end of July, Your Honor.
Well, she doesn't owe you any money for rent. At most, he owes you 2 months' rent. Tell me why you left.
My job doesn't pay that well, so I decided to go back to my parents' house.
When you took this apartment, this expensive apartment that was almost $3,000 a month rent, had you had a discussion with Armante about moving in with you before?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Jalil, I'm reading your complaint because something wasn't registering right with me. You say you moved into the apartment together in August of 2021. Then you go through a whole bunch of stuff about a cat and then another adopted cat. You said in October we adopted a second cat. Around this same time, a third roommate moved in to shoulder some of the rent. Well, that's not true. He moved in right at the beginning.
And that was...
That was what?
That was...
A mistake.
That was a mistake.
Okay. But Armante acknowledges that he agreed right at the beginning. He volunteered the fact that he was there at the lease signing because it was agreed at the lease signing that he was going to pay a third of the rent. So, sir, you owe him rent as long as you show me that you've paid the rent. You moved out in July?
Yes.
And you paid your rent through July, or were you evicted?
No, I paid my rent in July.
Through July?
Yes.
Okay. 1854. Armante, you owe him $1,854. That's for 2 months' rent. Got it?
Okay.
I'm not subtracting anything because you stole his girlfriend.
That's fair.
What were you requesting when you filed your small claims case?
Either the return of both cats or $5,000.
That's not happening for you, Mr. Jalil.
And later today,
There were restrictions put on the space.
No.
You have to pay attention,
Okay.
sir, because what I'm suggesting is really in your favor.
Oh, okay. Let me. Okay.
Kamar Jalil claims his former roommates, Katie Calderon and Amante Nepomuceno, are wrongfully keeping his cats and owe him rent money.
Now let's deal with the issue with the cats. She doesn't owe you any rent. That was not your agreement with her. You moved out in July. August, September, October, November, December. 5 months ago, she's had both cats, right?
Correct.
She says they're her cats. When did you first file a small claims case?
September of 2022.
What were you requesting when you filed your small claims case? Be careful.
I was requesting either the return of both cats or $5,000, which was the accumulated expense of not just the cats, but also the expenses of her dogs as well. So any animal expenses for
Okay.
the time.
That's not happening for you, Mr. Jalil. When the cats were either registered or went to the vet, whose name is on the sheet as owner?
I believe it was Miss Calderon.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And she owns the cats, and she's had them for the last 5 months. I suggest that you go and adopt 2 more if you want some more cats. Do you understand?
Yes.
You were living together as a couple. However, your friend Armante has to pay you for the couple of months' rent that he didn't because he says, not you, he volunteered that was your agreement from the very beginning. So he owes you $1,854. We're finished. Thank you very much.
This court is adjourned.
I think he's just kind of butthurt that I moved on.
At least now I can put everything behind me and say that I did try.
I didn't think it would escalate this far.
All you can do in a situation like this is just you learn from it and you move on.
The heart wants what the heart wants.
This is what it is. It's life.
I find fascinating, Sarah, that people will write and or be assisted in writing a complaint and an answer, but they read it over. This man is an intelligent man. He has a serious job for 8 years. First of all, he was suing for $10,000. Come up with that money. $5,000 for the cat's expense is ridiculous. But his complaint had really nothing to, even the timeline.
As your clerk, I know that is a pet peeve of yours when
I don't understand
they
it.
don't match up.
If you're going to tell a lie,
at least tell a consistent lie.
right.
I think the right thing happened. I think the defendant friend admitted himself that he owed the rent, and that was great, even though he probably should have just kept his mouth shut.
And not said, I was there when the lease was signed. This was always our agreement.
Yeah.
I was going to be the
but
third
he was
roommate.
honest, which we always appreciate, and so I think the right thing.
So
I think he needs to, like you say, put a period, move on.
Anyway, all happy, and they look happy. They couldn't keep their hands off each other.
Case number 2172, Foster Gardner versus Menzel. All parties, please come forward.
Jamar Foster and Sean Garner are suing record producer Livin Menzel for event costs after Livin canceled their Halloween party.
Who's Mr. Garner? Mr. Foster?
Right here.
Are you going to be speaking? You're standing in the speaking spot.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. According to what I read, the defendant rents a music studio. Is that correct?
I rent a facility in which I own a music studio.
You rent in someone else's building.
Yes.
And you're recording people. During the course of your business, you decided to enter into an agreement with the defendant to use that recording studio, which she rents from that space, which she rents from a landlord.
May I correct you, please, Your Honor?
Yes.
She actually is a facility that has multiple units in it. She runs a studio, and then there's other event space inside of that same facility.
Okay, give me an idea of how large the space is.
I believe we were quoted something like 5,800 square feet.
And so you have a music studio, and around it is other open space.
Yes.
You decided to go into some sort of a business with her. You wanted to run events.
Yes, ma'am.
Social events, nothing to do with the music studio.
Absolutely not.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And according to you, you gave her $6,000,
Yes, ma'am.
sort of front money, to start using that space.
Yes, ma'am.
Subsequent to giving her the money, according to you, there were restrictions put on the space, on the number of people you could have, the kind of parties you could have, etc.
No, absolutely. I apologize.
Well, you have to pay attention,
Okay.
sir, because what I'm suggesting is really in your favor.
Oh, okay. Let me. Okay.
So, is really in your favor, so you have to think.
Okay.
Subsequent to giving her, that means after giving her the money, restrictions were put on the kinds of events and the number of people you could have in the space. Is that true or not true?
That is absolutely true.
No, that's not.
I'll get to you in a second.
Okay.
And you want your $6,000 back.
Yes, ma'am. And
That's what it's about. The defendant does not deny that you gave her $6,000. And then I'm going to hear what her defense is. So I want you to tell me when, for the first time, did you have a discussion with the defendant about going into this business venture where you would front the money and whatever events you would have there, you would reap the benefit, the financial benefit from that. When did you have that discussion with her?
Okay, so we met living at the end of August of 2022. We actually signed the agreement pretty fast. We signed the contract agreement on September 1st.
May I see the agreement?
Yes, ma'am.
There was no agreement signed, so I don't know how it could be signed.
She keeps arguing that.
Just a
yeah.
second. Could you be quiet?
Yes, ma'am.
So in your hands,
What's,
that's the studio that she runs.
Sarah, You have to sort of explain it because I don't see signatures. You know, I'm used to looking at contracts where people sign things, but I know you can sign things by DocuSign now. Your signature isn't on here.
Yes, ma'am.
And
That looks like a signature from a DocuSign or some sort of online.
okay, is that you?
This was a proposal that I did. I do not even own it yet as a DBA.
Just a second. It's getting better. Don't say anything. This is your proposal. Now I'm going to read it.
Okay.
And your masterpiece management.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, so this is sort of easy. You prepared this proposal. Speak.
Yes, after.
Just a
this-
second.
okay.
You
Yes, ma'am.
prepared this proposal.
Yes, ma'am.
And as a result of this proposal, you received and deposited $6,000.
Yes.
Yes, well, then you have a binding contract, okay?
Okay.
So that's what I'm telling you. You have a binding contract. And there is nothing in this contract that limits the kinds of events or the number of people or anything else with regard to this space. All it says is business activities, event planning, and event rentals. Nothing else. And this is your proposal, so the terms of it are construed if there's any material question, since you prepared the agreement, which became a contract once you accepted their $6,000. I view the terms of the agreement most harshly against you because you prepared the document. And it says, this agreement cannot be amended without the written consent of all parties.
Yes.
Yes, so signed the agreement, you got the money, and then at some point, according to them and according to you, you made certain limitations on the kinds of events, the numbers of people, et cetera.
That is.
Now that happened according to you because you do not own that space, you rent that space, and there was a problem with the first party that they threw.
Correct.
Come on, we're not talking about Gone with the Wind here. We're not talking about a 6-volume masterpiece. We're talking about a yes or a no. Based upon this proposal, they gave you $6,000, which you deposited into your bank account. That means a contract was created. Pop, that's the agreement. I'm telling you, that's the law.
Jamar Foster and Sean Garner claim record producer Livin Manziel broke their agreement by canceling their event. Livin is countersuing for the costs of a recording session.
Okay, there was a party that got out of hand.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and after that party that got out of hand, too many people or whatever it was, your landlord complained.
Yes.
Okay, and it was after that that you told your 2 partners that
We are not partners.
Yeah, according to this, you are.
We didn't finalize the agreement.
This is a finalized agreement, madam. I just said to you, I want you to pay attention. This is your proposal. Based upon this proposal, they gave you $6,000, which you deposited into your bank account. That means a contract was created. Pop, that's the agreement. I'm telling you, that's the law.
Okay.
You prepared the proposal, you signed it, they said, okay, and they fulfilled their part of the agreement by giving you $6,000, which you accepted. Got it? Got it? And you can't, according to the agreement that you prepared, modify this agreement any other way than a written contract signed by both parties. You can't change the rules. Did you know that this was rented space?
We didn't have all of the details about the place.
Well, see, next time you should know what you're dealing with, whether she's the owner or whether she's not the owner, whether she's a renter, whether she has the ability to rent out to sublease for events. I mean, all these things. Before you give somebody $6,000, you should know that. Okay. And you had one event at the space?
No, we actually didn't get an opportunity to throw any events at the space at all. The event that you were speaking of, she had partnered with another group of promoters and individuals to throw that party. So you
didn't have anything to do with
didn't.
that? What was it, a Halloween party or
Yes,
something?
it
It was a
was.
Halloween party. But that wasn't with you.
No, that wasn't.
Is that correct?
He was a part of the
Is
event.
that correct? That
No.
it was with other people?
Yes, it was correct. It was with other people. They were just associated with the event. They worked at the event. And
I don't care whether they worked at the event. You received money from other people for an event.
Yes, ma'am.
Well,
Yes,
let's be clear. And after that event, you imposed additional restrictions on the use of the space.
No, Your
Just hold on a second.
They knew about the event.
Hold on. Can't tell me what they knew. This is your contract.
They called a fire marshal.
My landlord contacted me that the neighbors were complaining, people were parking on their lawns 90 minutes into the party, but it was not their party. Somebody else paid you for it. The next party, they wanted to